The Grandview Steakhouse hummed with the kind of quiet sophistication that only comes from establishments where the average entree costs more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Crystal wine glasses caught the warm light from wrought iron chandeliers, and the scent of perfectly grilled Wagyu beef mixed with the subtle fragrance of fresh orchids that adorned every table. I sat at the corner of our reserved table for 8, positioned perfectly to observe both my family's animated conversation and the elegant dining room beyond. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city skyline, each twinkling light representing the kind of success and prosperity that my family believed I would never achieve. Dad held court at the head of the table, looking every inch the successful businessman in his custom-tailored charcoal suit. At 58, Roberto Martinez still commanded respect in the construction industry, his weathered hands and confident demeanor telling the story of a man who had built his empire from nothing. Tonight, surrounded by his closest family and friends, he was in his element. 35 years in construction, he was saying, gesturing with his glass of aged bourbon, and I can tell you that success isn't about luck or timing. It's about hard work, making the right connections, and understanding that in business, image is everything. My mother, Isabella, nodded approvingly from his right side, her emerald dress complementing the diamond necklace Dad had given her for their anniversary. At 54, she still turned heads when she entered a room, and her proud smile as she watched Dad hold forth was the expression of a woman who had never doubted her husband's ability to provide the lifestyle she deserved. My older brother Carlos dominated the conversation from the other end of the table, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from inheriting the family business and expanding it successfully. At 32, he had taken Martinez Construction from a regional company to a statewide operation, and he never let anyone forget it. The Henderson project alone brought in $4.2 million this quarter, Carlos announced, pausing to straighten his Rolex Submariner. Sometimes I look at what we've built and wonder how people survive without real business acumen. His wife Maria smiled adoringly, her designer dress and perfect makeup serving as testament to the lifestyle that Carlos's success afforded. It takes a special kind of intelligence, she agreed, her voice carrying just loud enough for the entire table to hear. Not everyone has what it takes to operate at this level. I continued eating my perfectly prepared filet mignon, letting their familiar boasts wash over me like background music. They had no idea that the simple black dress I was wearing had been tailored by the same designer who dressed Fortune 500 CEOs. Or that the understated silver bracelet on my wrist was worth more than Carlos's monthly car payment. Speaking of operating at different levels, my Aunt Carmen chimed in from across the table, her tone carrying that particular mix of curiosity and condescension that family members perfect over decades. Elena, how's your little catering business going? Still doing those small office parties and birthday celebrations? The question was directed at me with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Aunt Carmen had always taken particular pleasure in pointing out what she saw as my professional shortcomings, especially in contrast to Carlos's obvious success. It's going well, I replied simply, taking another bite of my meal. The steak was cooked to perfection, medium rare with a beautiful sear that locked in all the natural flavors. Carlos leaned back in his chair, his voice growing louder with the confidence that comes from being the acknowledged family success story. Well, that's nice. Very hands-on work. Essential, I'm sure, for people who want home-cooked meals but don't have time to cook themselves. Maria giggled behind her wine glass, the sound sharp and artificial. Remember when we hired that catering company for our anniversary party last year? Sweet little operation but so limited in scope. No offense, Elena, but those small businesses can only grow so much before they hit their natural ceiling. Dad nodded sagely as if imparting wisdom earned through decades of experience. Elena's always been more of a practical person. Not everyone can handle the pressure of large-scale operations or complex business decisions. Some people are better suited for smaller, simpler ventures. I continued eating, my expression remaining neutral despite the familiar sting of their assumptions. They had no idea that my little catering business had generated more revenue in the past year than Martinez Construction's best quarter ever. Actually, Carlos stood up slightly, his voice beginning to carry across our section of the restaurant. I think this is the perfect time to address something that's been on my mind. Here we go, I thought, recognizing the theatrical tone he used when he wanted to make a grand statement. Other diners at nearby tables began glancing over, drawn by his increasingly loud voice. "Elena," he said, pointing at me with the kind of gesture that politicians use when they want to emphasize a point, "I need to be honest with you and with this entire family." The table fell silent except for the soft jazz music playing overhead and the distant sound of conversations from other tables. Everyone's attention focused on me like a spotlight. "You can't afford this place," Carlos continued, his voice gaining volume and confidence. "None of us are judging you for it, but let's be realistic about what's happening here. Dad's paying for your dinner tonight because your catering business simply doesn't generate the kind of income that allows for $100 steaks and $200 bottles of wine." Dad nodded approvingly, raising his bourbon glass. "Carlos is right, Mija. There's no shame in operating at a different level, but let's not pretend that catering birthday parties puts you in the same financial league as building shopping centers and office complexes." "Stop pretending," Dad laughed, the sound carrying more than a hint of condescension. "We all know what you make from those little catering jobs. This restaurant costs more for one meal than you probably make in a month." The words hung in the air like expensive perfume, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. I could feel the attention of nearby tables, other diners probably wondering why our family conversation was becoming so public and pointed. Carlos continued, apparently encouraged by Dad's support. "Look around this place, Elena. Look at the clientele, the prices, the level of service. This is where successful people eat. This is where business deals get made and real money changes hands. Your little catering business is fine for what it is, but let's not confuse playing house with running a real enterprise." The whole table joined in with nods and murmurs of agreement. Aunt Carmen smiled with satisfaction. Maria raised her wine glass as if toasting Carlos's harsh truth-telling. Mom reached over and patted my hand in what I assumed was meant to be a comforting gesture. "We love you anyway," Mom said softly, though her words carried clearly across the table. "Not everyone can be a high achiever. Some people are meant for simpler lives, and there's nothing wrong with that." That's when I noticed Roberto Castellanos, the restaurant's owner, approaching our table. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that spoke of quiet confidence and substantial wealth. I had been expecting him to stop by. After all, I had called ahead to let him know I would be dining here tonight. "Excuse me," Roberto said politely, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone educated in the finest business schools. "I don't mean to interrupt your family celebration, but I wanted to personally welcome one of our most valued partners." The table looked up at him with the kind of attention that successful people always commanded in restaurants like this. Dad straightened in his chair, probably assuming that Roberto was referring to him or Carlos. "Ms. Martinez," Roberto continued, turning directly toward me with a warm smile, "welcome to your newest location. I wanted to personally thank you for choosing to add Grandview Steakhouse to the Castellanos Restaurant Group. The acquisition paperwork was finalized this afternoon, and I'm honored that you've decided to keep me on as general manager." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the soft clinking of silverware from other tables, the distant hum of the air conditioning system, the barely audible jazz music that had been playing in the background all evening. Dad's fork dropped from his hand, clattering against his plate with a sound like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. Carlos's mouth fell open mid-chew. Maria's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Mom's hand went limp on top of mine. "Mr. Castellanos," I replied calmly, standing to shake his hand, "thank you for making the transition so smooth. I'm looking forward to working with you to maintain the exceptional standards that have made this location so successful." "Of course," Roberto continued, apparently oblivious to the shock radiating from my family members. "The other 7 locations in the chain are excited to welcome Grandview into the Martinez hospitality portfolio. I understand you're planning to standardize some of the operations across all properties." 7 locations? Dad whispered, his voice barely audible. 8 now with Grandview, I corrected gently. The Martinez Hospitality Group owns and operates fine dining establishments across 3 states. We specialize in acquiring established restaurants with strong local reputations and helping them expand their reach while maintaining their unique character. Roberto beamed with professional pride. Ms. Martinez built her empire from a single catering truck to a $47 million restaurant empire in just 8 years. Quite remarkable, really. The industry publications are calling it one of the most impressive bootstrap success stories in the hospitality sector. Carlos was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. $47 million? Conservative estimate, Roberto replied helpfully. The portfolio's actual value is closer to $60 million when you factor in the real estate holdings and the catering operation. Martinez Hospitality caters for Fortune 500 companies, major sports teams and celebrity events. They're booked solid for the next 18 months. I smiled at my family's stunned expressions. The little catering business you've been dismissing is actually the foundation of everything else. When you start with food trucks and work your way up to exclusive corporate contracts, you learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. Maria found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. But you drive a 10-year-old Honda. I drive a reliable vehicle that gets excellent gas mileage and doesn't draw unnecessary attention, I replied. Real success doesn't need to announce itself with flashy cars or designer logos. It speaks for itself. Roberto nodded approvingly. Ms. Martinez is known in the industry for her understated approach. She focuses on building sustainable businesses rather than creating impressive facades. Very smart strategy. Dad finally managed to close his mouth, though his eyes remained wide with shock. Elena, why didn't you ever tell us about any of this? Why did you let us think that I was a failure? I finished gently. Because every time I tried to share something about my business, you interrupted me to explain how real businesses operated. When I bought my first restaurant, you told me I was wasting my money. When I expanded to the second location, you said I was growing too fast and would lose everything. After a while, I stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already decided what I was capable of. Roberto glanced around the table, clearly sensing the family tension but maintaining his professional demeanor. I should let you return to your celebration. Ms. Martinez, the staff has been briefed on the ownership change, and your meal tonight is complimentary, of course. Please let me know if you need anything. As he walked away, the silence at our table was deafening. I could see other diners glancing over, probably wondering why a successful restaurant owner had just publicly acknowledged someone they'd assumed was the least successful person at the table. Elena, Mom said finally, her voice small and uncertain, I'm so sorry. We had no idea what you'd accomplished. I sat back down and picked up my fork, cutting another piece of the perfectly prepared steak. I know you didn't, and I forgive you, but things are going to be different going forward. Carlos leaned forward, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Different how? I'm not your little sister who needs guidance about how the business world works, I replied calmly. I'm a successful entrepreneur who happens to be related to you. I'd appreciate being treated accordingly. Dad cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. Mijay, we owe you an apology. A big one. You don't owe me anything, I said honestly. But I hope you'll remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone's success by your assumptions about their life. Aunt Carmen, who had been silent since Roberto's revelation, finally spoke up. Elena, would you consider catering my daughter's wedding? I know it's probably too small for what you do now. I smiled, the expression genuine for the first time all evening. Aunt Carmen, I'd be honored to cater Isabella's wedding. That's exactly the kind of personal event that reminds me why I started this business in the first place. As the evening wound down, Carlos pulled me aside. Elena, I was wrong tonight. About everything. I'm proud of what you've built and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I know you are, I replied, giving him a hug. And I love you anyway. But next time, maybe ask questions before making assumptions. Roberto stopped by our table one more time as we were preparing to leave, carrying a leather folder. Ms. Martinez, these are the final ownership documents for your review. Also, I wanted to mention that the Martinez Hospitality Group received 3 acquisition inquiries just this week. Business is certainly booming. As we walked out of Grandview Steakhouse, my newest restaurant, Dad put his arm around my shoulders. You know what the best part of tonight was? He asked. What's that? Learning that my daughter is even more successful than I ever dreamed of being. And realizing that maybe it's time for this old man to start asking for business advice instead of giving it. I laughed, the sound echoing through the restaurant's elegant lobby. Dad, you built an amazing company from nothing. But maybe we can learn from each other instead of competing. Deal. he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. Partners. Family, I corrected, taking his hand. Which is even better. As we left the restaurant that night, I realized that sometimes the sweetest victory isn't proving you were right all along. It's giving the people you love the chance to see you clearly for the first time. The next morning, Carlos called to ask if Martinez Hospitality might be interested in catering the grand opening of his next construction project. I told him I'd be honored to handle it personally,